Franks have, under the Merovingians, gone down a similar path as their Carolingian counterparts, and it might even seem as if their path to Christianization and Latinization is guaranteed. Somehow, despite the almost mirrored experience, things feel a bit different. Robert, the traitor, as he was labeled for his conversion, has great plans to take Merovingia into the future through its entering into the Christian world. While it might have seemed that he was betraying his roots with his conversion, in reality by being able to marry into the royal families of Europe, Robert could expand his influence far beyond the normal range. Being 60 years old now, he doesn't have too much time left, but with some healthy living and a strong sense of purpose, maybe he can push himself to accomplish a few more great things before passing the throne onto his progeny. Looking around his realm, Robert could see that his neighboring pagan family members were probably not a threat. Ultimately, the family bonds were strong, so much so that even after his conversion, Robert still honored his brother's call to arms when they came in. To his south, the kingdom of Aquitaine was a weak but large realm ruled by the remnants of the Western Carlings. The giant king, Manasses, was an interesting character, although he actually got along with Robert on account of his zealous nature. For him, a Christian is a Christian, no matter the other factors. That amicability was something which could be exploited. Most of Manasses' children were quite young, and betrothals between the families felt wise. One of Robert's grandchildren, Rosamond, was a strong pick to marry Gaucher, matrilineally of course. Sometime down the road, this will, hopefully, create Merovingian children who can claim Aquitaine for themselves. It may have been a bit dishonorable, but Robert was a pragmatic man who sought the expansion of his and his family's power. Learning to live among Christians, even more so, would eventually create opportunities to take the Italian Empire to the south, although that was a bit of a ways away. In the meantime, the Franks of the Seine have already begun evolving away from their cousins along the Rhine. Although the number of Franks in the realm is actually quite small, they formed something of an upper ruling class, borrowing heavily from their subjects. In many ways, the religious differences of the Seine Franks have led to it becoming a relatively central pillar of their lives. Spirituality, which is manifested in the form of language learning, has become the new way of the Franks, and this new culture, now speaking an Oil dialect of Latin, is called Métropolitain. It is so called because of the urban and mixed nature of the people living in Paris. Despite their movement towards Latinization, the Métropolitain people live aesthetically Frankish lives, keeping the names and look of their Rhine cousins despite speaking French. It was shortly after the cultural divergence that Robert passed away, being the first Merovingian king to be buried in Paris, with a tomb marked in Frankish. Although the people speak French, the language of nobility is still Frankish. This leaves the throne to Bernard, Robert's only son of 8 children. It was honestly quite lucky that Robert only had one son, since it made succession simple and uncontested. Looking at the line of kings before him, Bernard comes from a line of people who accomplished a great many things. There hasn't been a single king who simply ruled without anything of note. Even Robert I, who didn't do much, was the exception with his 3-year-long reign. Now Bernard will have to establish his name as worthy among his ancestors. Bernard has come to rule an extremely powerful realm on account of his family's dedication to building up the domain around the Seine. The real question was what he could do to establish himself. The Carlings were still a relatively strong power at this point in the game, and no one would blame him for just focusing in on further eradication of his dynastic enemies. But now that he's a Christian, there's a certain decorum that comes with that territory. Unfortunately, decorum makes for difficult conquest. Bernard would have to prove claims to the regions he wants to conquer. That meant he had 2 options in front of him. He'd have to either genuinely marry into the Carolingian family to create real claims, or he'd have to fake the claims based on centuries-old ties. For that, Bernard would have to become the first Merovingian king to be literate. There are centuries of chronicles to skim through in the Merovingian and Carolingian records, and if he was going to find a connection, he'd have to read them. Although the Merovingian chronicles were, of course, easy access, the Carolingian records were a little harder to access. Using his recent family ties to Aquitaine, Bernard was able to acquire texts from the Carling Grandmont family of Manasses. Little did he know that he'd be sealing Manasses and his own family's fate with that move. At the same time, those Merovingian records, which Bernard thought would be free to access, actually weren't. His uncle in Francia, Berold, was holding on to the records for no reason it seemed. Bernard's best guess was that he was upset over Merovingia's conversion to Catholicism, and it seemed he intended to hold that grudge. It wouldn't be pretty to fight off his family in Francia, but if they'll stand in his way, then they'll have to be moved. Soon after their exchange, a duel began, and given Bernard's youth, it was only reasonable that Berold would be defeated. Yet the treacherous villain wouldn't give up the records. It seemed this family record would have to be earned in the battlefield. This wouldn't be the last bit of meddling coming in from his uncles though, as Bernard, almost as quickly after he dueled his eastern uncle from the Rhine, his younger uncle from the west, Sigebald, had words with Bernard. All the visit was, on the surface, a visit to discuss the new family rivalry. Sigebald only seemed to have a surface level interest in it. It was implied, when Sigebald talked about Bernard's skill with the spear in that previous duel, that he was looking for more than just a family squabble to quash. While it might sound repulsive, Bernard was himself homosexual, meaning opportunities to find other men of a compatible orientation were rare. Beggars can't be choosers. From the outside looking in, this family, over the course of just a few months, has become extremely dysfunctional in just about the worst ways possible. A few months later, Siegebald and Bernard met up again for a repulsive night of fun, but what mattered more was the pillow talk. Everyone knew that Siegebald of Brittany was something of the dark horse of Siegebald the Mad's offspring. If you remember him from the first part, Siegebald was absolutely insanely narcissistic, and it seemed that his eponymous son inherited that insanity a little bit. Although he wasn't completely insane like his father, Siegebald was talking a lot about ambition and the responsibilities of a king. He looked at Bernard and told him that he has the world in his hands with Merovingia. Siegebald was stuck with Brittany, the backwater dwarf kingdom, granted to him more as a con than as a genuinely fair split. That talk was powerful, as the morning after, Bernard went to war with his rival uncle to take Flanders. He can't let his ambitions be stopped by a rival uncle whose pride is ruining the family. He'd pick apart his old Rhine homeland with the pretext of spreading the Christian way, even if in reality, he didn't particularly care about God or the Pope. Having defeated his uncle in single combat, doing it again but on the battlefield wouldn't be much of a task. By this time, the riches of Paris had funded a powerful army which towered over the opposing Frankish armies. Arriving in Cleves, Bernard laid siege to his uncle's capital, with the intention of seizing the famed records for himself. After the siege of Cleves, Bernard scoured the court, seeing that the royal family had already been evacuated. That was fine. He effectively flipped every stone in the castle and uprooted every piece of furniture with rage. He couldn't find them. This was unfortunate, given that if the records were found, then perhaps he could end his family feud. Funnily enough though, there was one thing he found in the castle. It was the corpse of his uncle, Berold, who must have come home after sustaining injuries in battle and died. In some ways, it was sobering to see his uncle dead, but it also complicated things, because Berold may have been the only man who even knew where the Merovingian chronicles were stored. Without the records, the war continued on as normal, and eventually a peace was made, with Flanders being returned to Merovingia. On the topic of records, the Aquitaine records weren't quite complete, so yet another unfortunate marriage with a German Carling branch would be necessary. Strangely enough, in his quest to eliminate the Carolingians, Bernard was slowly transitioning his family into becoming a Carolingian family. He married into the East German family and forged an alliance with a surprisingly powerful realm. Through the betrothal of Bernard's heir, Everard, and Matthias II's daughter, Engeltraud, the two most powerful realms of Europe became friends, and with a few savvy murders, the realms may eventually even combine. Looking at his most recent work, Siegebald sent Bernard a lock of hair to show his approval. Some might say at this point it was Siegebald running the realm, in the background, through his suggestions, although for now, the relationship was still relatively secret. Beyond the wars with Francia, Bernard also went after his cousins in Lotharingia, since for all he knew, Berold's records were stored there. No luck though, as Barroy didn't have any chronicles either. It was starting to dawn on Bernard that perhaps there was no records at all. Was it possible that Berold, the Foolish, was just too embarrassed to admit that he had lost them? While at first distraught about the loss of the records, Bernard's uncle Siegebald came to him to tell him that not all was lost. Given how well Bernard had been doing in his reading and writing lessons, he might just be able to write a new record, and maybe make up a few family connections here or there. Who would question it? Maybe the religious authorities would have qualms with fabricated records, but here came the opportunity to get the clergy in his pocket. A crusade for Lotharingia was declared against his cousin Frotari. Most presumed that Merovingia would sit this one out, since family is family, but instead Bernard used the opportunity to get on the Pope's good side. He would join this crusade, and free Cologne from pagan control. With his support, the crusade would be a formality, as the Germanic pagans had almost no support at this point. Bernard put up his niece, Anna Segundis, as the new queen of Lotharingia, and pleased the whole Christian world with his recent holy wars and crusade participations. Sadly, during this crusade, Siegebald of Brittany died of heart failure. He met the same fate as his father, who also died a raving lunatic. In his deathbed, Siegebald spoke in tongues, with the only recognizable word being Rome. When Bernard heard of his lover's death and last words, it certainly hurt him, but he was ready to lead the realm to the greatness that Siegebald would have wanted. The recent wars had started a shift in the Sen-Frank culture, changing a lot of their religious tolerance and scholarly discussion into more of a debate culture. They became quarrelsome and somewhat antagonistic, albeit oftentimes in a more amicable sense. There had always been a sense of competition with the urbanite chess tournaments of Paris and the local valley, but now those tournaments were played out with scowls instead of smiles. Bernard is 50 years old now. He still hasn't quite pulled off a lot besides tearing his family apart and getting his family in deep with the Carolingians. He did manage to murder the various heirs of East Francia and get his daughter-in-law Engeltraud onto the throne. Assuming she would have children with Everard, then the Merovingian family will find its way onto the German throne. That's not bad, but is it really enough? Instead, Bernard has spent most of his life on himself and his studies, and heading into his 50s, his writing has improved immensely, and he's ready to begin chronicling the family. Using sources from various places, including descendants of the people who his ancestors had conquered, Bernard began writing about his family's exploits from the days of his legendary great-great-grandfather up until the modern day. In the meantime, years of his writings, he helped his daughter-in-law to conquer more land from his cousins in Francia. It was perplexing to watch a Merovingian help a Carolingian conquer a fellow Merovingian, but it made sense given that East Francia would inevitably become a Merovingian realm once heirs were born. Indeed, an heir was born, Karl. It was something of a tongue-in-cheek jab at the Carolingians that a Merovingian named Karl would be the one to steal away East Francia from Charlemagne's illustrious line. In 1041, Bernard was ready to release his new family chronicle, which its readers would come to see had some obvious embellishments. Somehow, through a vague Frankish common woman, who was unnamed in the chronicle, it turned out that a Merovingian ancestor was actually Charlemagne's true biological mother, and the so-called mother of Charlemagne was an adopted mother. This was proven based on testimony from subjects who definitely were not threatened to be executed if they gave the wrong opinion. The church saw no reason to deny Bernard this claim, and allowed him to lay claim to the Empire of Italia, at the time ruled by a young, comatose Caroline king, Nicholas. Beyond that, he also wrote in what most people considered a typo. Part of the chronicle was that Robert II was actually anointed a saint and given the honorary title of Roman Emperor, akin to Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire. The church let it go, thinking it would be acknowledged for the typo that it was, and conflating the terms Roman Emperor and Holy Roman Emperor. With that, Bernard was able to use his influence to gain claims on Italia and the Eastern Roman Empire. From here, it was time to bring about Siegebald's ambition. The war with Italia was easy, and also embarrassing for the Karlings, as Ingiltrude came in to help her father-in-law against her own family. It seemed she was nothing more than a puppet. With the capital located in Sardinia, a fleet of ships took to the remote island and stormed the throne room. Nicholas was slumped over, drooling in his throne. Bernard simply drafted a peace deal and found one of the emperor's wax seals, signing his own peace treaty in the name of the incapable king. With that, he became the new emperor of Italia. He renamed the empire immediately to reflect its new size and called it l'Empire Transalpine, in reference to its territory across both sides of the mountain range. He also gave it a more traditional Merovingian coat of arms, using the red and yellow motifs of the family crest. His conquests were not done yet though, as he next went after Rome itself. As a self-proclaimed Roman emperor, it was only his right to hold the Eternal City itself. The Pope put up a good fight, and even won a battle or two, prompting Bernard to get into the field himself. He had some armor and a weapon made for his own usage. He named them after his beloved Siegebald. He now held Siegebald's Mindbreaker, a bit of a macabre joke around Siegebald's name and its lack of sanity, and the hammer's ability to crack skulls. While things were going well on the battlefield, it turned out that back in East Francia, Ingiltrude had been sending out Everard to fight some of her battles. And unfortunately, her lack of care resulted in Everard being killed in battle. He was killed by none other than Frotari, the old king of Lotharingia's heir. That meant the line of succession passed on to his grandson, Karl, who was heir to both the Transalpine Empire and East Francia. Around the same time, his commissioned armor set was ready, which he called Siegebald's Protection. Another joke around protection in more than one way. Bernard only wished that his son, Karl, could have had Siegebald's Protection, with which he could have survived, maybe. Either way, Karl was a promising child, and if anything, having a younger heir might be healthiest for the realm. Rome then fell, and became the new capital of the Merovingian Empire. To be honest, these accomplishments alone were likely enough to put Bernard into the family history with a strong contribution, but he wasn't quite done yet. He's in his mid-60s now, but he's still got some fight left. He had two tasks in his mind left to complete: the conquest of Aquitaine and the seizure of the Roman Empire. He first had to kill Gautier Carling, who was the father of one of his cousins, so that a claim could be passed on. From there, he fought to put said cousin, Sieglevold, onto Aquitaine's throne. Their chronicles were of great use before, but now they were just a nuisance on the border. Aquitaine couldn't put up any kind of actual fight, and was defeated without a second thought. Next up was the Roman Empire. Its juicy history and rich land were tantalizing. Bernard's life wouldn't be complete without wearing Justinian's crown at least once. And so the war commenced, and the army landed in Constantinople. That being said, the Romans weren't a pushover, unlike so many other opponents. Despite managing to hold the capital, the Romans kept fighting against the Merovingians, refusing to acknowledge his family's right to the throne. Indeed, to some extent, they had succeeded in defending their realm. After several failed attacks, the Franks in Constantinople walked out of the castle in return for safe passage back home. A white peace was signed, but this only strengthened the claims, as within the treaty, Bernard made sure to have the Romans acknowledge that he was a pretender to the throne. Suddenly, Bernard had absolutely ruined his reputation in return for a chance of glory, and he'd half succeeded. He was excommunicated for his conquest of Rome, and rumors of his murders in the past were coming to light, branding him a kinslayer and murderer. As he was raising his grandson, Karl, he would often teach him about the difficult choices kings and now emperors make. Karl would have to make similar decisions himself one day, but for now he had the joy of a life without the weight of a crown. Karl was raised to work hard, work well, and work right. He was a glowing example of a proper king, being temperate, patient, and diligent. Even his vice of flagellation was in some ways a form of meditation. He was also a multilingual child, speaking French, Low and High German, and a West Slavic dialect, although funnily enough he did not speak Frankish. He had yet to spend enough time in the court sufficiently to pick up the language for royal usage. As Bernard was introducing Karl to the court, he got quite the start, as one of the first delegates to enter the throne room with Karl present was the Dauphin of Savoy and his supporters, demanding that the vassals be given more autonomy. They were upset with Bernard's horrific actions of the past, and only let it go if he gave them privileges. No one actually cares about morality in the noble world, boy. They only care about what morality can get them. Don't let anyone fool you. These men have likely killed even more people than I have. But you don't see them getting locked up in moral dilemmas, do you? If your power is threatened, don't let it stand, he advised his grandson, and then stood up, declaring these nobles to be treasonous and to prepare for battle. The uppity lords made demands that their swords couldn't back up, as they were crushed without much difficulty. But it was good timing, since Karl could learn a lot from the experience. After the rebellion was down, another lesson and ambition came up. As feeling his age, Bernard knew he didn't have much longer to claim his Roman throne. He had signed a truce with the emperor, but that wouldn't get in the way. He plotted a murder to get rid of the man he signed a truce with and to put a child on the throne. Although he was caught in the act, a man of Bernard's age didn't particularly care. As long as he could make a bid for the throne, what was one more murder on the list? The 7-year-old Basilius Megistos was not fit for the throne, and under that pretext Bernard went to war. He laid siege to Constantinople once again, this time with even more ease, and found the poor kid cowering in his chambers. With the Basilius captured and removed from power, Bernard forced the child to relinquish the empire through tears. The Roman Empire, in its fallen state at least, was finally in his hands. If he was going to restore the empire, he'd need a lot more of the classical Roman provinces, starting with Aegyptus. He handed out the Upper Egyptian duchies to the new lords and assigned Lower Egypt, Alexandria, and the kingdom itself to his son, Abrahil. He was young, but the kid would pick up the reins relatively easily, Bernard believed. The next target was Carthage, and although Bernard declared that war, he would die of natural causes at 79, just as his army landed near Tunis. The realm was in Karl's hands at 23 years old, with the lessons of his grandfather fresh in his mind. Hopefully, he'd be able to realize his father's dream of a true Roman Empire. Initial challenges to Karl's rule were plentiful and strong. Initially, the Egyptian Muslims rose up, although without any noble support, they weren't much of a threat. It was the simultaneous threat of the Greek peasants and their noble supporters that could have ramifications for the empire. Luckily, Karl wasn't alone in this world. Despite his grandfather's advice being gone, his mom, Engeltraud, was a better stateswoman than expected. Even though she and her whole realm knew that she was a Merovingian plant, she wanted to at least get her own name into the history books. She had expanded East Francia into the Rhine, the Lowlands, and even made moves into Prussia of all places. With his mother's help, Karl was able to defeat the Greek rebels and revoke their land so he could replace them with lords loyal to him. This was a huge move for his control over the realm, as without the Greek lords to oppose him, he'd hopefully garner a loyal collection of nobles below him, which he could use to recover the previous Roman territories. Speaking of which, it was time to take Jerusalem for the Christians, which he intended to rule as his own domain, alongside Rome, Constantinople, and Paris. The emperor ought to have his domain spread across the empire. With Jerusalem taken, one of Christianity's greatest holy sites was back under control. Meanwhile, Engeltraud was making even more progress to establishing her empire, as she was making moves into England, and Karl was using his grandfather's lessons to murder the sultan that he had just taken Palestine from. Once he was dead, he went back in to grab Antioch, which was another important Christian city. From here, Karl's lessons were starting to take an ominous turn. He was considering murdering his own mother, with the hopes that he could inherit her realm to further his own power. That was too much for him though, as considering her age, she'd finish her life on her own relatively soon anyway. There was no need to accelerate it. He instead continued focusing on the Levant, as he assassinated the new Sultan once again and then declared a war for Syria. The disunited Muslim world fell easily to Karl's armies, and the Levant was in his hands. He simply handed out the land to new lords and looked upon his realm. It was getting pretty damn large, but it wasn't quite where it needed to be. Despite recent difficulties with the Pope, it seemed that the current arrangement of Rome was being put aside so that a crusade for the kingdom of Zaporizhia could be declared. Why the Pope cared about this far-flung steppe kingdom was unknown, but perhaps he just disliked Jews. Also, it turns out that East Francia had been declared a proper empire after taking the rest of England and most of northern Europe. The now Kaiserin Engeltraud was actually an immensely impressive ruler who herself was accomplishing the creation of a realm almost as impressive as the Romans. Like mother, like son. Anyway, the crusade for Zaporizhia was quite simple, as the Christian world was relatively united, and with the Merovingians involved, the war was a joke. The Crusaders put up a Merovingian named Bernard to the throne. Using the piety and prestige he earned in that crusade, Karl became a symbol of the new era of Roman peace. Although his empire was incomplete, it was complete enough to become the de facto Christian realm, utterly obsoleting the Orthodox Church and every other church which didn't follow the Pope in exile. Catholic Christianity dominated Western, Central, and Eastern Europe now, with only some Orthodox pockets in Asia Minor and the Balkans to uproot. The unification of Christianity let Karl consecrate his bloodline as a true saint. Unlike the somewhat falsified sainthood of Robert II, Karl actually was canonized. Finally, Karl declared himself the true Roman Emperor and became the Caesar of Rome, joining the ranks of legendary Roman emperors of old like Trajan, Augustus, and Julius. The last puzzle piece to fit in was his mother's realm, which he was the rightful heir to. He could wait around for her death, but the power of the Roman throne was somehow intoxicating. He felt the need to rush succession a little, and before long he had murdered his mother, all for an ounce more land. With Britain seized, Karl went after Londinium, hoping to move his capital there as a way to assert his authority in the region. Given that this land was relatively new to his rule, he'd have to show that he was invested in the area, and what better way to do that than to move the capital there? It wouldn't be as nice as Rome, but he wanted to see the corners of his empire in person. Fighting the Saxons in Essex was obviously not a fight even worth going over, as the army of the enemy side may as well have been ants beneath Karl's massive Roman armies. With the capital in London now, Karl was a bit upset with London's weather, but it was a nice change of pace in a way from the beautiful temperate weather of Rome. Despite his success, many of his mother's subjects were not happy being subjects of the Romans, although who knows why, and so they rose up in a rebellion looking for independence. The province of Aegyptus and various lords across Germania and Britannia rose up. What was more though was that during the Civil War, a murderous plot most foul took the life of Karl in his new home in London. Perhaps during their move across the channel, an infiltrator was able to place a toxic spider in his bed, killing him quickly. Suddenly, Everard, who at least is a grown man, is the new Roman emperor, and as quickly as Karl had taken his place in the sun, Apollo let it set. The sun was rising on Everard, but was he ready to take his place? Whether Everard can fight off this civil war or not will depend on how well he can fight across different ends of the empire, and how well he can hold the realm together during this time of weakness. It could be that the Romans will collapse as quickly as they assembled, but Everard is a competent king. Although he has a kinder bent than his ancestors, he's clearly competent at the very least. This is what could be considered the zenith of the Merovingians, who in their quest to defeat the Carolingians have gone far beyond just putting them down. Indeed, the Merovingians have, in just about every manner, surpassed them. While the Carolingians might have been Holy Roman Emperors, the Merovingians are true Roman Emperors, who united Christianity and Europe under one banner. Will they continue growing, or will they fall to internal strife? That remains to be seen. I hope you enjoyed the video. Consider liking, subscribing, and commenting, and so on. Thank you for your time.